Today, the casket carrying the remains of the late President Jimmy Carter was transported from Georgia to Washington, D.C. in preparation for Carter's official state funeral later this week. That solemn occasion is coming as President Carter's legacy has just been thrust back into the news by incoming President Donald Trump.
The Panama Canal is a disgrace, what took place at the Panama Canal. Jimmy Carter gave it to them for $1. And they were supposed to treat us well. I thought it was a terrible thing to do.
In a rambling press conference today, Trump attacked Carter's legacy while Carter's body was literally still on its way to the Capitol, to a city preparing to honor Carter's life. That fight with a recently deceased president has a lot to do with Trump's newfound fixation on American territorial expansion, which in turn led to a bizarre declaration that the U.S. should regain control of the Panama Canal. Now, to understand what is going on in Trump's mind here, you have to go all the way back to January 9th, 1964, exactly 61 years ago this week. At the time, anti-American riots had broken out in Panama, in part over U.S. control over the Panama Canal. That conflict sparked more than a decade of very careful diplomacy which spanned the administrations of 4 presidents, with the goal of handing control of the Panama Canal over to the people of Panama. For most of that time, negotiations in Washington were serious and they were bipartisan. With a few notable exceptions, Democrats and Republicans were largely aligned on the plan to negotiate a fair treaty to hand over control of the canal. A young moderate senator by the name of Joseph Biden even called the Panama Canal the last vestige of U.S. imperialism. By 1976, the U.S. was in the final stages of negotiating a treaty with Panama's leader, General Omar Torrijos. But right around that time, some enterprising far-right conservatives realized that they could use the Panama Canal to gin up nationalist anger among the American public. They began arguing that America should leave the negotiations and keep control of the Panama Canal. And keep control of the Panama Canal movement. That movement then found a very charismatic messenger.
The Panama Canal Zone is sovereign United States territory, just as much as Alaska is, as well as the states carved from the Louisiana Purchase. We bought it, we paid for it, and General Torrijos should be told we're going to keep it.
Ronald Reagan became the American avatar for the movement to try and keep the Panama Canal. At the time, Reagan was contesting Gerald Ford's nomination as the Republican candidate for president in the 1976 election. And Reagan made the Panama Canal a central issue of his campaign. Now, Reagan ultimately lost that primary to Gerald Ford, and then Gerald Ford went on to lose the presidential race to Jimmy Carter. But the Panama Canal issue did not go away, and neither did Ronald Reagan. The task of finalizing the agreement fell in President Carter's lap, and Reagan laid the foundation for his next presidential run by challenging President Carter at every step. Reagan gave public speeches, and he testified before Congress. He even held a public debate with fellow conservative William F. Buckley over the merits of keeping the Panama Canal. But in 1977, President Carter signed the treaty, and that handed over control of the Panama Canal.
We are here to participate in the signing of treaties which will assure a peaceful and prosperous and secure future for an international waterway of great importance to us all. But the treaties do more than that. They mark the commitment of the United States to the belief that fairness and not force should lie at the heart of our dealings with the nations of the world.
Fairness, not force. It was a powerful statement by President Carter. But by that point, the issue had gone from a matter of diplomacy to a full-blown wedge issue. There were even protests outside the White House. And that movement was part of the coalition that ultimately helped propel Ronald Reagan to victory over Jimmy Carter in the 1980 presidential race. And yet, despite Reagan's crusade, The Panama Canal Treaty remained in place throughout Reagan's presidency. Apparently, it wasn't a major priority for President Reagan once he was actually in office. But the germ of Reagan's populist crusade against the Panama Canal Treaty, that idea lived on in the minds of other populist-minded conservatives. And so today, as we prepare to re-enter the presidential administration of a man whose worldview remains stubbornly stuck in the 1970s and 80s, we are now relitigating one of the most cynical debates in American foreign policy. And because this is Donald Trump we are dealing with, the foolish and ill-conceived imperial ambitions go way beyond just Panama.
Well, we need Greenland for national security purposes. People really don't even know if Denmark has any legal right to it. But if they do, they should give it up because we need it for national security.
Donald Trump wants to take Greenland. You may recall that Trump toyed with the idea of buying Greenland during his first presidential administration, even though the nation of Denmark says it has less than zero interest in handing over Greenland to the United States. Remember, Greenland has effectively been under Danish control since the year 1814, which is well before the period of the 1980s where Donald Trump's brain is apparently stuck. Nonetheless, today, the president's son, Don Jr., landed in Greenland in order to keep speculation about the supposed American takeover alive. And in his press conference today, Trump refused to rule out the idea of using military force to acquire both Greenland and the Panama Canal, though you should make of that what you will. The origins of Trump's Greenland scheme are both younger and even dumber than Trump's Panamanian fixation. As reporters Peter Baker and Susan Glasser reported in their book, The Divider, Trump was first put onto the idea of acquiring Greenland by one of his billionaire friends, Ronald Lauder, who's one of the heirs to the Estee Lauder Cosmetics fortune. According to Glasser and Baker, Trump was so obsessed with the Greenland idea in his first administration that it absorbed the National Security Council staff for months, buying Greenland. And part of Trump's fixation with Greenland may have stemmed from his failure to understand how maps work. Actually, Trump told Glasser and Baker, "I love maps. And I always said, look at the size of this. It's massive. That should be part of the United States." Okay, now if you look at a map of Greenland, it does appear to be massive, right? But that's not because Greenland is actually massive or even approaching the size of the United States. It's because the Earth is a sphere. And so when you lay out the sphere on a flat map, all of the areas near the North and South poles are stretched out to look bigger than they actually are. Greenland is still, a pretty large territory, but in reality, it is not nearly as big as it appears on a flat map. Yet Donald Trump appears to have become obsessed with the idea of acquiring Greenland and maybe using the U.S. military to do so because Greenland looks massive. That is the level American foreign policy is about to be operating on. Today, Trump also reiterated a desire to make Canada the 51st U.S. state, something Canadians have precisely no interest in. Trump also said he wants to rename the Gulf of Mexico the Gulf of America because he thinks that sounds better. All of this is obviously ridiculous, and in many ways, it is a distraction from the things Trump could actually do as president. But the idea behind this territorial expansion is very serious. As Reagan proved 50 years ago, the concept of America as an expansive global empire can be a very intoxicating political force. And while buying Greenland may be a fantasy, powerful nations like Russia and China are trying to expand their territorial control at all costs. And America will have to decide if it wants to be on the side of sovereignty and self-determination, or whether it wants to be on the side of imperial expansion, however unhinged that expansion may be. A choice, as the late Jimmy Carter said, between fairness or force.